Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to 100 Days of Inversion. Today is day 4. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory before we get down to the work phase. First of all, let's have a definition for inversion. What is it? Any exercise, movement, posture that you do that involves reversing the normal effect of gravity on the body in some way. A couple of good quick indicators. If your feet are higher up in space than your hips, that's some level of inversion. If your sacrum is higher up in space than your skull, that's some level of inversion. And why is my definition so vague, you might be wondering? It's because I have at least 2 divisions of types of inversion I want to talk with you guys about today. I call them compressive inversion postures and distractive inversion postures. So let's talk about compressive inversions first. That would be anything like a headstand, handstand, anything where as you reverse the flow of gravity through the body, the force of gravity is reducing the amount of space between the joints, in particular in the vertebral column, increasing the amount of pressure on the discs and the intervertebral spaces in the spinal column. So much like our spine functions when we're standing upright normally, it's resisting the compressive energy of gravity in these shapes. Interestingly enough, one of the benefits of practicing these shapes is actually to cultivate the opposite of compression. We're strengthening the body's ability to elongate through the central axis against that compressive force. We're just flipping it upside down to give the body some different feedback to work with. In some ways, a headstand is very similar to a standing posture like Zhanzhuang. We'll talk more about that later. Let's move on now to distractive inversions. So what we're talking about with distractive inversions is any posture wherein gravity is now above our heads instead of beneath our feet, but the spinal column is allowed to lengthen. In fact, the force of gravity is distracting or pulling apart the joint spaces in the spinal column, reducing the amount of force acting on the discs and increasing the amount of space in those joints. So examples of this would be, the first that would come to mind would be hanging from upside down or an inversion table or anything like that. But there are a couple of others that sneak into yoga practice, and I'm going to show you a couple of from Tai Chi during the work phase video for today, that people might not commonly think of as inversions, but in fact they are, because as you'll see when I do them, the sacrum is above the skull. Therefore, for at least part of the body, the effect of gravity has been reversed. And again, like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Side note, an interesting thing about the distractive inversions is just like compressive inversions, they develop their opposite in the body. So as we practice distractive inversions, we're actually developing the stabilizing structures inside the body that resist against excessive lengthening. And of course, this is all functional if balanced properly. You have to keep the yin and the yang in harmony with each other. So if we do some amount of compressive inversions for a while, then we want to balance that out with distractive inversions so the body doesn't get crushed by too much compressive force over long periods of time and distort the spine, and nor do any of the ligaments that reinforce spinal health get any laxity in them and get excessively long to the point where they no longer protect other structures inside the spinal column, most importantly the spinal cord, the central nervous system, of course. Anyway, we'll talk more anatomy at another point in time. Let's get to work.